Now that we've worked on simplifying expressions, we can start moving on to the next topic, which is solving equations. Today we're just going to take a look at one-step equations, and in particular we're going to look at just some simple addition and subtraction. So you can put today's date, and then title your notes one-step equations. When you're solving equations, there's a couple steps to follow. So the first step to follow when you're solving equations is to locate the variable. Remember, variable was a term that just stood for a letter that you see in an expression or in an equation. So you find the variable, you find the letter, and then you figure out the operation that's tied to the variable. So you find the variable, and then you figure out the operations that is connected to the variable. The third step then is once you know what is happening to the variable, you use inverse operations on both sides of the equal sign to solve. We're going to talk about what inverse operations are, but when you're solving an equation, you got to keep it balanced. You have to do one thing on one side of the equal sign, and the same thing on the other side of the equal sign. And then the last step that you can always do with equations is check your answer. So very quickly as a review, inverse operations are just the undo operations that undo each other. So I'm going to put in quotations, undo. So it's what operations undo each other. So if I give you a problem with addition, the undo of addition is subtraction. And vice versa. So I'm going to draw arrows that go both ways. Addition and subtraction are the undo operations of each other. The other undo operations are multiplication, which goes with division. So dividing and multiplying undo each other. So for today, we're just going to look at examples with addition and subtraction just to make sure we got the idea down, and then we'll start getting more advanced with multiplication and division, and then multiple step equations. So let's look at some examples. Let's say I gave you a problem like x plus 5 equals 10. Now, I know in your head you can probably guess and check and see what answer would fit to make this statement true. That's an okay step for these types of equations, but once we get to a little bit more advanced, you got to understand the steps of how to solve. So I'm going to show you the steps of how to solve. Remember, our first step from above was to locate the variable. So the variable here is x. So I found the variable. I'm going to figure out the operation that's connected to it. So x, we're adding 5 to x. to solve it, I use inverse operation. So the inverse operation of adding 5 is subtracting 5. All right, we just had some technical difficulty there, but I think I got it figured out. So to undo adding 5, I subtract 5 to both sides. So then take a look at what happens. When you undo the operation to the variable, so 5 take away 5, these are going to eliminate. 5 minus 5 is 0. So the only thing left on this side is x, because x plus 0 is still just x. And then my solution here, 10 minus 5 is 5. So for a one-step equation, I found my solution. Plugging in 5 for x plus 5 equals 10. So 5 plus 5 equals 10. That's a good answer. Let's look at one with some subtraction. So let's say I have m minus 11 equals negative 9. Locate your variable. Figure out the operation that's occurring with the variable. So we're subtracting 11. The inverse of subtracting 11 is of adding 11. So I have to add 11 to both sides of the equal sign. So if it helps, some people like to draw a little wall separating the two sides of the equal sign. So if I add 11 on this side, I have to add 11 on the other side of the equal sign. Again, negative 11 plus 11, those cancel out. That's the whole point. Negative 9 plus 11, that gives me positive 2. And if I check this, if I plug in 2, 2 minus 11 does give me negative 9. So that's a good answer. Equations don't always have to be written in this form, so I want you to be comfortable seeing problems where the number comes first and then plus the letter. So let's say here I've got 9 equals 14 plus k. The undo of adding 14 would be subtracting 14. So I'm going to subtract 14 on the right-hand side of the equal sign and on the left-hand side. And again, remember, if you're having trouble seeing that, draw that line separating the two sides of the equal sign. So 9 minus 14 is negative 5. And on this side, all I'm left with is the k. And that's the whole point. Let's look at one more example. Let's say I gave you negative 10 plus r equals 20. So again, the equation looks a little bit different, but I'm still doing the similar steps. I'm looking for the variable, figuring out what's happening. I'm adding negative 10, so adding a negative is like subtracting. So I have to undo subtracting 10. The undo of subtracting 10 is adding 10. So I have to add 10 to both sides. Negative 10 plus 10 cancels out. So I have r equals 30. Because it's a plus r, that's a positive r, so I don't need to write the positive again down here. There's my solution. So when I plug in 30, negative 10 plus 30 does give me 20. So that's solving one-step equations, just adding and subtracting. That's what we're going to work on first.